Imagine being sucked into a 30-inch pipe in a tornado of water, tools and men rushing along underwater in the dark without completely understanding what was happening to you. Holding your breath, with the certainty that you would drown in just moments. Only one of the 5 men sucked into the pipeline that day would live to tell what happened. A GoPro video camera attached to one of the diver's suits recorded video and audio of what happened next. What it reveals is terrifying. This is the fatal breakdown of the Paria Diving Disaster. February 25, 2022 began as a normal day of work for the men of LMCS diving in Pointe-à-Pierre. They were to perform some maintenance tasks on a pipeline for Pariah Fuel, a government-owned oil company in Trinidad and Tobago. As professional divers, for Kazim Ali Jr., Yusuf Henry, Faisal Kurban, Rishi Nagasar, and Chris Boudram, it was just another day of work. They would be working on a section of pipe that was not in current use. It was a U-shaped pipeline between the area where an oil tanker would pull up to offload its oil, called berth 5, and the area where the oil enters the refinery, called berth 6. In order to perform their work for the day, they would have to separate the pipe from the ocean water to access the areas that needed repair. To do this, they placed a special habitat bell over the top of the pipe. This system would allow the water to be pushed down off the pipe so they could have a dry place to work. The habitat was an 8-foot by 8-foot cube structure placed over the top part of the pipe. After air is blown inside to displace the water, the men could stand on the ledge to perform their work in a hyperbaric chamber. This allowed them to remove their diving gear and safely use tools to perform complex repairs and maneuvers as a group. One of the tasks they had to complete was the removal of an inflatable plug at berth 6. This plug had been inserted almost 2 weeks before to protect the oil contents of the pipe and stop any hydrocarbons from escaping. This plug was an airtight barrier that held tightly against the pressure pushing down from the habitat chamber. A wrench was retrieved in order to loosen the valve on the plug. Kazim Ali passed the wrench up to the 4 men working around the pipe. Then he pulled himself up onto the ledge to remove his diving equipment. As soon as the valve was opened, a shocking force immediately overtook the group. Water rushed into the habitat and down into the pipe. This instant flush of water pulled the men and all of their equipment into a tornado of water swirling down the pipeline. It was so unexpected that they barely understood what was actually happening to them. In such an unlucky moment, they were extremely fortunate to settle from the water in a spot that had an air pocket for breathing. The GoPro video captured the men in the moments just before being sucked in, then everything went completely black. As you hear the rustling and movement, it's shocking to hear them start to talk. They were actually shouting at each other within this pipe that was supposed to be full of crude oil. The horrible irony is that this air that was allowing them to breathe was actually the cause of the swirling water tornado that brought them here. So how exactly did this happen? The inflatable plug that they were removing was supposed to be separating 1,200 barrels of oil from the air and ocean water around it. In that case, it would have been a matter of routine to remove the plug and proceed with their work plan. The air pressure in the habitat would have been pressing down on a heavy column of oil. The oil would have been settled level between the 2 pipe openings at berth 5 and 6. Nothing out of the ordinary. Unfortunately, they had no idea that there was a column of air under that plug, and a lot less oil in the length of the pipe. As soon as the plug was deflated, the high-pressure air from the habitat rushed down the pipe with such force, it pulled the men, their tool and scuba tanks, into the 30-inch pipeline. Because the habitat pressure was suddenly released, the ocean water violently pushed inside and swirled into the pipe with the men. In a wild swirl of air, ocean water and tools were 5 men fighting for breath. After what must have felt like an eternity, the swirling settled and they found themselves in a pocket of air. Chris Boudram, the lone survivor, described the unthinkable moment of being sucked into an oil pipeline like this.
Tornado, everything just spinning and beating you up, and it happened so fast you couldn't react. After that, all I remember, I didn't even remember actually getting pulled in the pipe. I just remember going hurled through the pipe at unbelievable speeds. I couldn't hold my breath no longer, my throat. And you're holding your breath for too long, after a while your body, your lungs just fight. Your airways close, you just hear noise. Your body suffering to pull air. An unbelievable nightmare. Your eyes burning. Every time you try to open your eyes, it's burning. you're pitch black, you can't see nothing. Your throat burning, your ears ringing, your body sore. And at that point, I tell myself I was going on dead.
Once they stopped, the men took a quick inventory of where they were, how they were feeling, and whether all 5 men had made it. They began shouting back and forth to find each other and confirm that they truly were inside the pipe together. It was just so unbelievable, but it was the awful reality. Trying to comprehend where they were in the pipeline was a lot harder than it seems. They were completely disoriented and had no idea how far they'd moved down the pipe. This pipeline section was 1,200 feet long as 4 football fields. The pipe had undulations at weld seams or where supports were placed. These variations in elevation allowed air pockets to form. Once they got their bearings, it was clear that they were all battered, but alive. In all the disorientation, they weren't in agreement as to which direction would lead them back to berth 6. After some discussion, they decided to link together and shuffle as a group toward one of the ends. The entire pipe was coated with thick, slippery oil sludge. It was exhausting to keep fighting against the oil and barely moving while dealing with broken bones, battered organs, oil in their eyes and nostrils, and all of this in complete darkness. At some point, after struggling for an hour, they encountered a shocking problem. The seawater level was rising. They were holding their heads above the water, but the first in line noticed that his face was now only 6 inches from the top of the pipe. There was no way to continue like this. Some of the men were seriously hurt and wouldn't be able to move much longer anyway. Chris Boudram and Kazim Ali were the first 2 leading the group. The other men, Yusuf, Faisal and Rishi, were the next 3 in the pipe. It was decided that Chris and Kazim would try to hold their breath and see if they could find another pocket of air. They promised the men that they would fight to get out and return with help for everyone. The 2 men held their faces high in the water for as long as possible, then held their breath to swim forward looking for air. Their struggle brought them to a second pocket of air, closer to the riser pipe that might lead them out. They were ecstatic to find 2 of their scuba tanks resting in this section. It felt like this was all they needed to make their escape. They almost used both bottles of oxygen to move through the next section, but Kazim's injuries were getting more serious, and he wasn't able to move quickly. Together, they decided that it would be best for Chris to take what was left of the oxygen and make a swim for the end of the pipe to get help. He placed the tank in front of his body and pushed it along as he squeezed forward in a narrow 2.5-foot tube. When he got to the riser end of the pipe, he was struck with a frightening thought. What if this was berth 5 and not berth 6? He would swim up nearly 60 feet and simply run into an inflated plug. There would be no air, and his tank was almost empty. He said a prayer and pushed off the bottom to make his way to the surface. After more than 2 hours in the pipe, Chris was relieved to find he had reached the top of the oily water at berth 6. He banged and screamed to try to get the attention of the rest of the ship team. One of the searchers finally found him and helped him climb out with a chain. Chris was overwhelmed and exhausted. He explained that there were air pockets in the line and that all the men were still alive. He was rushed to the hospital after letting rescuers know that there was air and that they were hurt, but alive. Up until this point, the other members of LMCS weren't sure that they could even be alive. They assumed that the pipe was full of oil and the men would have drowned in minutes. They also knew that any oxygen tanks would last up to an hour each. It had been more than 2 hours since the men had been sucked into the pipeline, but finally, this was a glimmer of hope. Once Chris explained the situation, divers in the water tapped on the pipe in different locations and received a tapping response from inside. The trapped men must have felt overwhelming relief that someone knows that they are inside. They knew that professional divers and equipment of all kinds would be out on the ship above them. Oxygen tanks, rope, lights, help. Hour after hour, they waited to see a glimmer of light or hear the metal clang of oxygen tanks coming down. But they saw nothing. They heard nothing. Not only were they suffering with their injuries sustained in the initial flush, they now struggled to breathe the acrid, oily air. Each hour increased the carbon dioxide content of this limited air supply, so breathing would become more and more challenging. And so they waited. No matter how the debacle of the non-rescue came about, it is a desperately sad reality that these men were just a few hundred feet from salvation, but no one ever came. They struggled in pain, knocked for attention, and attempted to move themselves to the exit. It must have been a crushing realization after days stuck in the oily pipe. No one was coming. The actions taken by LMCS, Pariah Fuel, their sister company Heritage, and the Coast Guard are much debated. It is claimed by some that Pariah prevented divers from entering the pipe to save the other men. Pariah claims that there was no viable plan to get the men out without risking more lives. Some believe that the men were certainly dead, and the banging was from something else. The Coast Guard, LMCS, and family members who were professional divers all have their own version of the events. The facts that cannot be denied are these. 4 men were alive at 5 o'clock on Friday when Chris Boudrum was rescued. Many people agree that they heard banging on the pipes from inside for nearly 48 hours before it stopped. After the bodies had been recovered, 2 autopsies were performed. Though the autopsies did not agree on the time of death, it was clear that all the men lived until various times on Saturday, and some appear to have lived until Monday. We are not sure if the men succumbed to their injuries, or ran out of breathable air, or even drowned trying to swim to one of the pipe exits. A commission of inquiry was formed in Trinidad and Tobago. Their findings are scheduled to be released in August of 2023.
Because everything inside me open and rescue, you know? Everything inside me open and rescue was going on. Nobody was making an attempt to rescue me.
I trying to come up. General. Yeah. Yeah. Right behind you, man. All right behind you? You're right behind me? Yeah. You don't know when you're trying to come up? It's not coming up. Who making all that noise? Come on, all that we let's figure it out. We gotta go. We gotta start moving. Yeah. Where you at? I don't know. I'm trying to come up. Trying to come up. I'm trying to come up. Who is that boy there? Yusuf? Oh, Yusuf? How long you have to walk before you meet crazy? You and Five wants to get all the time? Who else with you? We have Five alone. Cars for you? Right there. Right there where? Cars, everything alright with you? No. Any items break? Your leg, alright. Five, anything happen to you? Yeah. A five? Yusuf, anything happened to you?
Yeah, boy.
What happened?